Welcome to the digital version of Toland Hall, where a remarkable 10-panel set of fresco-style murals depict the history of medicine in California. This presentation is the result of painstaking efforts to digitally capture, preserve, and share the New Deal-era murals that once adorned the walls of Toland Hall at UC San Francisco. Toland Hall was a large lecture amphitheater located in UC Hall building, the first. This panel depicts the chaotic state of medical practice during the gold rush. Only about half of those who practiced medicine in California at the time had ever set foot in a medical school. Medical treatments consisted primarily of herbal remedies and patent medicine, better known as snake oil. Surgeons worked without anesthesia, and classically trained physicians competed with quacks for patients. Out of this chaos, the foundations of modern medical practice and training were established. The promise of gold sparked an unprecedented migration to California. The population of San Francisco alone exploded from 2,500 in 1848 to more than 30,000 by 1849. Some 1,500 practicing physicians came to California at this time. Most hoped to strike it rich in the gold fields located along the Sierra Nevada mountains. California was a frontier of European exploration and colonization in the 18th and early 19th centuries. The Spanish, Mexicans, and Americans each attempted to civilize what was to them an untapped wilderness. Medical practice under such circumstances was a largely ad hoc affair, with those exploring.
Depicting the earliest European contacts in California, this panel follows the artist's penchant for triptych, or three-part presentations. Here, the parts are divided by California's coastal grasses. In the first scene, we see a likely fictional exchange of medicinal knowledge between indigenous peoples and Spanish missionary Junipero Serra, a Roman Catholic priest of the Franciscan order who was responsible for establishing the first mission in California in 1769. Disease was a scourge for the early mission settlers who had to learn to live off the local environment, so gaining knowledge of local medicines was vital for their survival. The central scene features English explorer Sir Francis Drake presiding over the autopsy of his. Located roughly in the center of the curved wall at the back of the auditorium, this panel, divided by an exit door, marks the chronological beginning of the story told in the Toland Hall fresco-style murals. It portrays the healthcare practices of indigenous peoples of California prior to the European contact. From this section, the story of the history of.
In the first panel, covering the medical history of Southern California, the artist returns to his favored triptych format, though the divisions here are less clearly defined than in previous panels. Each scene focuses on the ravages of disease and efforts to address this.
Continuing the story of medicine in Southern California, divided by the palm tree in the center, this panel depicts the efforts of pioneering doctors and scientists in establishing scientific medical traditions across its two scenes. The first scene portrays two pioneering doctors of Southern California. John Marsh, a Spanish-speaking.
Located on the far right end of Toland Hall's front wall, this panel attempts to portray the early struggles of modern medicine in San Francisco, including questions of medical professionalization, the influence of racism on public health efforts, and the need for medical institutions that could overcome.
Located on the far left end of the auditorium's front wall, this panel is dedicated to notable early figures in the history of the University of California's medical school. Artistically arranged to contrast the panel on San Francisco's medical history at the opposite end of the wall, the indoor setting in this panel intentionally reflects the architectural features of Toland Hall itself, giving the impression of adding more space to the room and inviting those in the auditorium to consider the figures.
Located just to the left of the hall's projection screen, the Hooper panel depicts the application and dissemination of medical research developed at UCSF through the G.W. Hooper Research Foundation, established in 1913. George Williams Hooper was a wealthy lumber tycoon and directed the establishment of a philanthropic institution in his will.
Above the door and to the right of the screen, the final panel in Toland Hall symbolized the machinery of science and its possible applications. Zakeim built upon the circular motif of the Hooper panel to create a spiral pattern by implying the motion of the giant wheel at the center. The muscular figure to the left represents human.
Before he painted the fresco-style murals in Toland Hall, Bernard Zakeim worked on two murals for Cole Hall to decorate the spaces on both sides of the blackboard. For the 10 by 10 foot panels, he conceived two images juxtaposing the turbulent brutality of ancient medicine against the orderly calm of modern scientific-based healing. This panel, titled Ancient Medicine, comprises of deliberately swirling, chaotic motions that emphasize the anguish and suffering of humanity across the centuries before the advent of medicine.